Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Aliens and UFOs video. Alright, let's go ahead and we'll do the second video here for my series based on your recent suggestions. Thank you so much for those suggestions. Please keep them coming. I'm going to go ahead and finish the rest of the videos, probably out another 3 or 4 within next week's time period. This one is a very unusual, very bizarre suggestion. Never heard of this one before, but after reading all the information tied to it, it was so good, so amazing, so fascinating. It immediately made me think of those cheesy 1950s black and white films, the ones involving some of those corny special effects, just really just made on a budget, the kind of films that are usually just shown like at 2 or 3 in the morning on some late night channel just to fill airspace. That's the kind of stuff that this reminded me of. But apparently, if one reads into this information and truly believes it, this happened to a young pair of men. So back in the 1970s. So a very bizarre encounter. It has to do, and this is a very memorable name, with the giant space brains of Palos Verdes. That's right, giant space brains. If you've seen Futurama, there was a very distinct episode featuring, or several of them featuring those type of space brains. Well, think of that, but in this case, happening here on this Earth to a pair of two young men. So let's go ahead and we'll talk about all that information here. So what was this case, the giant space brains of Palos Verdes? Well, it occurred back on August 17th, 1971, there at a place called Palos Verdes, hence the name tied to it. And the two men that were involved, one was a guy by the name of Peter Rodriguez, and the other was a guy by the name of John Hodges, both of them in their late 20s. Well, on this particular night, there they were driving back. I don't know exactly if they were driving back from some kind of party. It said the information that they left a home of one of their friends. In fact, the area that they were driving from was known as Dapplegray Lane, but it was late at night, 2 a.m., when they were deciding to go back to their homes respectively. So there they were driving off when all of a sudden, that's when they saw something. Their headlights caught something, or a pair of somethings, right across the road in front of them, and what they saw they couldn't believe. Here's how they described it. They noticed a pair of what was considered, or the closest thing that they could actually tie into, huge disembodied brains, two of them again, lying across the street about 6 feet in front of their car, right there, right in the middle of the road. That's how they described it, because that's the immediate thing that they looked like. There's even some kind of vapor of some sort that was coming out of these brains, unknown what this vapor was, but there it was, doing so. And as far as their sizes, they were described about the size of an overgrown softball. That's how one of the pair of gentlemen described their sizes, and then the other one probably around the size of a human torso or so. Most interestingly enough, besides looking like a brain, almost like Krang if you will, they had a red eye-like organ tied to their center of the frontal part of their, I guess you could reference it like their face or their frontal lobe. So whatever these things were, there they were on the road. They looked like human brains, larger ones than usual, and they had some vapor coming across them with these red eye-like organs on the front part of their faces. Needless to say, these two guys, they were not gonna hang around too long to see what happened. So within moments, they immediately just sped away from these brains, and then seemingly that was it. They just went back to their homes. In this case, the guy, John Hodges dropped off his friend Rodriguez, and then Hodges went back to his home. So again, he thought that everything was over. Who knows if they were, if things just stayed as is, if they were going to discuss this with anyone else afterward. But because it wasn't over, here's what occurred. So when Hodges, was driving back to his home, again after dropping off Rodriguez, that's when he noticed that the time now was a couple of hours ahead. It was 4:30 in the a.m. And he realized that that couldn't be so, because the way he timed it, Hodges knew that this usual trip from his friend's home to his own home is a 10-minute trip at most. So why had it turned into a 2-hour trip? And he couldn't explain it, but little by little, either he was looking up the information from it, or he himself, just had to find out what occurred, like what other tales are very similar to this, and somehow along the way he was told or found out himself about the idea of doing that kind of hypnotic regression, the idea where he can be put under hypnosis, and then that way he can find out where those hours went, because it seems like he was adding 2 plus 2. He was thinking to himself, missing time, these weird brains, and then probably coming across stories about past UFOs. He was thinking that something like this happened to him, where he was either abducted or something else different altogether, but he had to find out what it was. So he was finally placed under this hypnotic regression, and when he did so, that's when he was able to recount what had occurred. So he dropped off Rodriguez, who luckily it seems like did not encounter these brains afterward like Hodges did. But once he dropped off Rodriguez at his home, that's when he was coming to his home and he was walking up to it, and that's when he saw these same 2 brains, the ones he encountered there on the street, waiting for him right outside his home. What a sight, right? Imagine coming up something like that to your home. You're just nonchalantly, let's say, parking your car, and then you're closing the car door, and then you're just walking to the house, and there they are, either just flat on the ground or just most likely just floating right above the doorway. But there they are, just waiting for you. Too little, too late. The way Hodges described it, based on his hypnotic regression, that's when he lost consciousness. And he woke up next into a strange area. The closest he could describe it was a control room, which was interesting because I remember talking about one of the other videos, not just the last one that I did, but other tales of UFOs, and the way they were taken out, these alien abductees taken out of the earth. It was the same deal, like they are in some kind of control room that was filled with what looked like computer consoles. So it's interesting to see that all these tales seem to have the very similar type environment. But here's where things take yet a different turn, a shocking turn of sorts. So if you thought that these brains were the actual aliens themselves, in a way they were, but they weren't the ones doing the abducting, because again, he's stating under hypnosis, that's when he was met by a group. I don't know how many were in that group, but they were a group of the more traditional Greys. In this case, they were bald, they were thin-lipped, they were humanoid. They had 6 webbed fingers and toes, is the way he described it. But unlike most other Greys that are smaller than humans, these Greys were 7 feet tall. So here's where it takes, I guess you call it, a more familiar turn in terms of the type of entities that he was encountering. They told him that these blue brains, first off, it seemed like they were telling him, don't worry, don't fear anything, but that these blue brains that he encountered were actually translation devices. That was their way of being able to communicate with him and vice versa, so that way they could understand one another. And then that's where, yet again, this story takes on a more familiar turn, because past encounters with others, it seems like in abductions, seem to be where they're told the earth is on a path of destruction, you must spread messages about it, you must try to prevent it, we are on a peaceful path to try to prevent it, something along those myths, something along those lines. Such was the case here. These creatures, whatever they were, these aliens, were also telling him about it. In fact, they were showing him images, in this case yet again, of, it looks like, multiple nuclear detonations, like nuclear atomic bombs, something along those lines. And they were quoting him, quote, stating stuff like, take the time to understand yourself, the time draws near as one shall need to. And then they were showing him more images about it, including something as far as another planet. I don't know if it was similar to Earth in terms of how it looked and so forth, but it was the idea that this was the results of those planets not heeding their instructions, and because of it, with those life forms within it ended up destroying themselves. They considered it some kind of psychological warfare, so that's why they were on a path to try to make sure that here on Earth that would not happen as well, because it apparently happened on yet another planet. And that's when Hodges stated that he felt some kind of buzzing within his body after he was told all these, I guess you could call them prophetic messages, and to try to make sure that he spreads it around. But he opened his eyes because he must have passed out, and that's when he found himself back in the car and going on the path that he was before. Again, 2 hours later, but that was the missing time that he had. But that was it. That's all the information with regards to these giant space brains of Palos Verdes. Eventually, Hodges and Rodriguez, they agreed to try to draw these creatures based on their own best memory, and that's where they drew what they considered, the aliens, the Globster aliens, and then there was speculation too that maybe what Hodges encountered may have been just a holographic projection of where he was going rather than the real deal. But that's just another set of speculation. But the only other news related to Hodges is that he stated, this is where it gets a little weird, and this is where like red flags start coming out with regards to his tale. But he stated that he started to receive telepathic messages from the aliens after his encounter throughout the years, and the reason for it was because he stated that he had something implanted within him, some kind of device, some kind of chip, whatever it was, that would deliver these messages. Who knows where the aliens were, but they were sending it to him still. And one of those messages was that in 1983 there would be a gigantic war that would break out in the Middle East, so much so that it would spread across Europe, and it would finally culminate with the use of atomic bombs. And so clearly that never happened. 1983 came and went. There was nothing apocalyptic along those lines, nothing even close, even throughout all these years thereafter. So again, a lot of red flags with that tale, but he's stating it or others are stating it that because the message was spread, then that was prevented. So who knows? I'll just always present this information for yourself to decide. But did himself having this encounter with the giant space brains and then trying to showcase all this information thereafter, after the 1971 encounter, did it prevent the 1983 encounter? Was it never going to happen? Was this all made up? Was this all a scam, a hoax? Who knows? There's even the idea that these guys, where they were coming from, because there was a party, were they maybe a little inebriated? Were they taking other types of entertainments, if you will, like along the green type, and that's what's causing them to have this kind of vision along the way? Who knows? That's all for yourself to decide. Or was this all 100% true? What they encountered, this one-of-a-kind thing that apparently never happened afterward to anyone else, that is again for yourselves to decide. But if anyone has any more information, the giant space brains of Palos Verdes, which again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it plays out like a 1950s black and white cheap sci-fi film. I mean, but this is the real deal. Like if this happened, if this truly happened there in Palos Verdes, then this is as real as it gets. If anyone has any more information about it, that would be really great to hear too. So, right, everybody, thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.